The galaxy had known peace under the Consortium's rule for 3 centuries. 12 species sat in judgment over lesser civilizations, their wisdom unquestioned, their authority absolute. The Great Council chambers on Nexus Prime had witnessed the rise and fall of entire star systems, the arbitration of interstellar disputes, and the careful management of galactic order. Yet in all those years of accumulated jurisprudence, nothing had prepared the assembled justices for the events of solar cycle 2387, when a single human child would alter the very foundations of their civilization. The case file bore the designation XK7749 Consortium vs. Y. Maya Chen, human, age 14 standard cycles. What should have been a routine disciplinary hearing for a minor infraction would instead become the catalyst for the most significant upheaval in galactic governance since the formation of the Consortium itself. The official records, sanitized for public consumption, speak of unprecedented circumstances and administrative restructuring. The truth, as recorded in these classified documents, tells a far different story. Commander Zethkar of the Vorthan military caste stood before the imposing obsidian doors of the council chambers, his 4 arms crossed in the traditional gesture of patient duty. His species had served as the Consortium's enforcers for 2 centuries, their natural aggression and pack mentality making them ideal for maintaining order among the lesser races. Today's assignment seemed almost insultingly simple. Escort 1 human juvenile to face judgment for the destruction of a mining facility on Kepler 442b. The child in question stood barely to his chest, her dark hair pulled back in what humans called a ponytail, her clothes bearing the simple grey fabric of a detention facility uniform. Her case file made for interesting reading. Maya Chen, born on the human colony of New Shanghai, orphaned at age 7 when raiders destroyed her settlement, subsequently raised in a series of foster facilities across 3 different star systems. Her psychological profile noted exceptional intelligence, alongside difficulty with authority figures and violent tendencies when cornered. What the file failed to capture was the calculating intelligence in her dark eyes, the way she seemed to catalogue every detail of her surroundings with the methodical precision of a military scout. Zethkar had transported thousands of prisoners in his career, from hardened criminals to political dissidents, and he had learned to read the subtle signs that separated the truly dangerous from the merely desperate. This child radiated a cold composure that set his predatory instincts on edge. "Tell me, Commander." Maya spoke for the first time since leaving her cell, her voice carrying an odd formality for someone her age. "What do you know about the mining operation on Kepler 442b?" Zethkar's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his kind. "I know that you destroyed 17 billion credits worth of equipment and killed 43 beings in the process. The Council does not look favorably upon such actions, regardless of the perpetrator's age." 43 beings, she repeated, as if testing the words. "That's what they're calling them now? Beings." Her laugh held no humor whatsoever. "Those 43 beings were operating a slave labor camp. The equipment I destroyed was being used to process rare minerals using the unpaid labor of kidnapped children from 12 different species. But I suppose that doesn't appear in your official briefing." The Borthan's pace slowed slightly. His species valued strength above all else, but they also possessed a rigid code of honor regarding the treatment of young. "The charges against you make no mention of slavery. The charges against me mention terrorism, destruction of property, and mass murder. They don't mention that the property in question was a concentration camp, or that the victims were the camp's guards and overseers." Maya's voice remained level, conversational, as if discussing the weather rather than her impending trial. "Tell me, Commander, what happens to terrorists under Consortium law?" Zethkar knew the answer, as did anyone familiar with galactic jurisprudence. Terrorism carried a mandatory sentence of execution, regardless of the perpetrator's age or circumstances. The Consortium had learned early in its formation that mercy toward those who threatened the established order only invited further chaos. "You will face the judgment of the Council. That is not for me to determine." "But you know what that judgment will be?" It wasn't a question. They walked in silence for several minutes, their footsteps echoing through the marble corridors of the judicial complex. The walls bore carved representations of the 12 founding species of the Consortium, their artistic styles blending together in a carefully designed harmony that symbolized galactic unity under law. Humans were notably absent from these displays, their species too young and too troublesome to merit inclusion among the galaxy's governing races. As they approached the council chambers, Maya's demeanor shifted subtly. The resigned calm she had maintained throughout their journey was replaced by something harder, more focused. She straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin, transforming from a condemned child into something that resembled a soldier preparing for battle. "Commander," she said, stopping just outside the chamber doors, "I want you to remember something after today is over." Zethkar turned to face her, curious despite himself. "The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others." She smiled then, and the expression sent an involuntary chill through the Vorthan's combat-hardened nervous system. "I destroyed my weak self the day I watched my parents burn. Everything since then has been preparation for this moment." Before he could respond, the massive doors began to swing open, revealing the vast circular chamber beyond. The Great Council of the Consortium sat in judgment, 12 seats arranged in a perfect circle around the accused platform. Each seat represented millions of years of evolutionary development, thousands of years of civilization, centuries of accumulated wisdom and experience. At the center of it all stood a simple metal chair, where the condemned would face their final judgment. The chamber itself was a masterwork of architectural intimidation. The ceiling soared 300 meters above, its crystalline dome designed to focus and amplify sound so that every whispered word from the council would carry the weight of divine pronouncement. The walls bore the complete legal code of the consortium, countless volumes of law and precedent that governed the lives of trillions of beings across the galaxy. At the apex of the dome, a single beam of light illuminated the accused chair, creating the impression of judgment from the very heavens themselves. High Justice Varimak of the Zenthari Collective occupied the primary seat, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into dancing patterns across the walls. The Zenthari were among the oldest species in the galaxy, their silicon-based biology granting them lifespans measured in millennia. Varimak himself had presided over the council for the past 4 centuries, his decisions shaping the legal framework that governed billions of lives. His voice, when he spoke, resonated with harmonic overtones that seemed to emerge from the very walls themselves. "The accused will take her place," he intoned, the ancient words of jurisprudence rolling through the chamber like thunder. Maya walked forward without hesitation, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. She neither hurried nor delayed, moving with the measured pace of someone who had already accepted whatever fate awaited her. When she reached the chair, she sat down with perfect posture, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes scanning the assembled justices with apparent curiosity rather than fear. Justice Karath of the Hegemony, a massive reptilian being whose species had conquered half their home galaxy before joining the consortium, leaned forward in his seat. "You stand accused of terrorism, destruction of consortium property, and the murder of 43 beings in the execution of your crimes. How do you answer these charges?" "I answer them with a question of my own," Maya replied, her young voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "Under what authority does this council claim jurisdiction over my actions?" A murmur rippled through the assembled justices. In 3 centuries of operation, no accused had ever questioned the fundamental authority of the council itself. High Justice Varimak's crystalline form flickered with what might have been amusement or annoyance. "This council derives its authority from the Consortium Charter, ratified by all member species and recognized throughout the galaxy as the supreme law governing interstellar conduct," Varimak replied. "Your species, while not a founding member, exists within consortium space and is therefore subject to consortium law." "My species exists within consortium space," Maya agreed. "But we never agreed to your jurisdiction. Humanity was never consulted when your laws were imposed upon us. We were never given representation in this council. We were simply conquered and told to obey." She paused, letting her words settle in the vast chamber. "Tell me, Justice Varimak, what separates legitimate governance from mere tyranny?" Justice Thekvar of the Molluscan Empire, his tentacled form writhing with agitation, spoke before Varimak could respond. "The authority of this council is not subject to debate by those who stand accused before it. You will answer the charges against you, or we will proceed to sentencing based on the evidence already presented." "By all means," Maya said, spreading her hands in a gesture of invitation. "Let us examine the evidence. The prosecution claims I destroyed mining equipment and killed 43 beings on Kepler 442b. These facts are not in dispute. What the prosecution has failed to establish is the context in which these actions took place. She stood then, ignoring the restraint field that was supposed to keep the accused seated, and walked to the center of the platform. The field sparked and flared but failed to contain her, a fact that sent several justices reaching for their emergency alert controls. "Commander Zethkar," she called, addressing the Vorthan guard who still stood by the chamber entrance. "You mentioned earlier that you have transported thousands of prisoners. In all that time, how many of them claim to be innocent?" The commander's mandibles clicked nervously. Speaking out of turn in the council chambers was a serious breach of protocol, but something in the girl's tone compelled him to answer. "Most of them claim innocence. It is expected. And yet you seem troubled by my case specifically. Why is that?" High Justice Verimac's voice cut across the chamber like a blade. "The accused will confine herself to answering the charges. This council will not tolerate theatrical displays or attempts to manipulate the proceedings." Maya turned to face the Zenthari justice, her expression serene. "Manipulation suggests deception, Your Honor. I have no intention of deceiving anyone here today. The truth is far more powerful than any lie I could construct." She walked closer to the justice's elevated platform, her movements fluid and confident despite her youth. "You want to know about the 43 beings I killed? Let me tell you about them." Without waiting for permission, she began to speak, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "Overseer Krathmek of the Hegemony Forces, convicted of the rape and murder of juvenile slaves on 3 separate occasions before being assigned to Kepler 442b. Guard Captain Velfar of the Molluscan Empire, who maintained a personal collection of preserved specimens taken from living victims. Mining Supervisor Quinn Nakamura, a human collaborator who sold his own species into bondage in exchange for a position of authority over his victims." She continued methodically through the list, providing names, crimes, and specific details that could only have come from extensive investigation and planning. With each name she spoke, the justices grew more uncomfortable, shifting in their seats as the carefully sanitized version of events began to unravel. Transport Officer Zeknith of the Vorthan military caste, who specialized in breaking the spirits of young prisoners through systematic torture. Communications technician Sarah Martinez, another human collaborator who used her position to identify and target specific victims for her superiors' entertainment. "Shall I continue, or have you heard enough?" Justice Korath's claws scraped against his seat's armrest. "Even if these allegations were true, they do not justify the taking of justice into your own hands. The proper course of action would have been to report these crimes to the appropriate consortium authorities." Maya's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Report to whom? The consortium authorities who authorized the facility in the first place? The military commanders who staffed it with their most violent and corrupt personnel? The judicial system that has spent 3 centuries turning a blind eye to the suffering of those they consider beneath their notice?" She pulled a small device from her sleeve, causing several guards to reach for their weapons before recognizing it as a simple data projector. "I believe in evidence, Your Honors. Perhaps you would like to see what I saw when I arrived at that mining facility." The projector activated without her touching it, casting a 3-dimensional hologram into the center of the chamber. The image showed the interior of a mining complex, but not the clean, efficient operation described in the official reports. Instead, the justices found themselves looking at row upon row of cages, barely large enough to hold their occupants, most of whom appeared to be children or adolescents from various species. "This is Sublevel 7 of the Kepler 442b mining facility," Maya narrated as the image shifted to show different areas of the complex. 347 sentient beings between the ages of 6 and 16 standard cycles, taken from their families and forced to work 18-hour shifts in the deepest mines. No medical care, minimal food, and punishment for any sign of resistance. The hologram showed more disturbing details. Makeshift medical facilities where injured workers were either healed just enough to continue working or simply left to die. Guard quarters filled with trophies taken from deceased prisoners. Administrative offices where the buying and selling of sentient beings was conducted with the same casual efficiency as any other business transaction. Justice Melithar of the Aqueous Republics, her translucent form rippling with distress, spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "These images, where did you obtain them?" "From the facility's own security systems," Maya replied. "Every crime, every atrocity, every casual act of cruelty was recorded and stored in their databases. They kept meticulous records of their operations, confident that they would never be held accountable for their actions." She gestured to the hologram, which now showed a young human girl being dragged from her cage by two guards. This is Rebecca Martinez, age 11, Sarah Martinez's younger sister. Would you like to see what they did to her? Enough! High Justice Varimak's harmonic voice cracked like a whip across the chamber. These images prove nothing regarding your guilt or innocence in the charges before us. Even if every allegation you have made is true, it does not give you the right to commit mass murder. Maya nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. You're absolutely correct, Your Honor. Nothing gives me the right to kill. Nothing justifies the taking of life regardless of the circumstances. She paused, letting the admission hang in the air. But tell me, what gives you the right to allow it? The question hung in the vast chamber like a challenge thrown down before the assembled might of galactic civilization. For the first time in centuries, the Great Council found itself on the defensive, forced to justify actions they had taken for granted as necessary for the maintenance of order. The consortium operates under a carefully balanced system of laws designed to ensure the greatest good for the greatest number, Justice Varimak replied, his crystalline form flickering with what might have been uncertainty. Individual tragedies are unfortunate, but they cannot be allowed to undermine the stability that protects billions of other lives. Billions of lives, Maya repeated. And how many of those lives belong to species like mine? How many humans sit in positions of authority within your government? How many of my people have been granted the rights and protections you claim to provide? The silence that followed was answer enough. In 3 centuries of consortium rule, humanity had been classified as a developing species, under consortium protection, which in practice meant they had no voice in their own governance and no recourse when consortium policies harmed their interests. The human species is still young, Justice Thekvar offered, his tentacles writhing with discomfort. In time, as your people prove their ability to participate constructively in galactic civilization, they will be granted full membership and all the rights that entails. In time, Maya echoed. And until that time arrives, how many more facilities like Kepler 442b will operate under your protection? How many more children will disappear into your carefully regulated system of exploitation? How many more generations will live and die as second-class beings in a galaxy that claims to value justice above all else? She began walking again, circling the chamber's perimeter as she spoke, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the vast space. You want to know why I killed those 43 beings? It wasn't revenge, though they certainly deserved death for their crimes. It wasn't even justice, though. Justice was long overdue. I killed them because they represented something far worse than individual evil. They represented the systematic, institutionalized oppression of the weak by the strong, justified by laws that protect the oppressors and silence the oppressed. The hologram shifted again, now showing the moment of Maya's arrival at the facility. She appeared as a small figure moving through the complex's corridors with purpose and determination, her actions recorded by the same security systems that had documented years of abuse and exploitation. I spent 6 months preparing for this operation, she continued, her narration accompanying the holographic display. 6 months learning about the facility's operations, identifying its personnel, studying their routines and weaknesses. I could have simply rescued the prisoners and disappeared, but that would have solved nothing. Another facility would have opened somewhere else, staffed by different personnel but serving the same purpose. The hologram showed Maya systematically disabling the facility's defenses, not through violence or destruction, but through careful manipulation of the computer systems. She moved through the complex like a ghost, appearing and disappearing at will, always staying one step ahead of the security forces attempting to track her. I gave each of them a choice, Maya said, her voice taking on a harder edge. Every guard, every overseer, every administrator had the opportunity to walk away. I even provided them with transportation and enough credits to start over somewhere else. Do you know how many of them took that offer? The assembled justices waited for her answer, though the continuing holographic display suggested what it would be. 3. 3 out of 46 chose to leave rather than continue participating in the systematic torture of children. The other 43 chose to stay and fight to preserve their little empire of suffering. The hologram now showed the facility's personnel taking defensive positions, arming themselves with military-grade weapons, preparing to defend their operations against a 14-year-old girl. Tell me, Your Honors, what does it say about your system of justice when career criminals will fight to the death to preserve it? Justice Korat's massive form shifted restlessly in his seat. You speak of offering choices to these individuals. But what choice did you give to the children you claim to have been protecting? Did you ask them if they wanted you to commit murder on their behalf? Maya's expression softened for the first time since entering the chamber, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight of sorrow that seemed far too heavy for someone her age. I asked them many things, Your Honor. I asked them if they wanted to be free, and they said yes. I asked them if they wanted their tormentors to face justice, and they said yes. But you're right. I never asked them if they wanted me to become a killer for their sake. She gestured to the hologram, which now showed the aftermath of the facility's destruction. Hundreds of freed prisoners were being loaded onto transport ships, their faces showing a mixture of hope and trauma that spoke to years of suffering finally ended. But I did ask them something else, Maya continued. I asked them what they wanted me to do if I was captured and brought before the very system that had condemned them to slavery in the first place. Do you know what they said? The chamber waited in tense silence. They said, "Make them remember us." Maya's voice was quiet now, almost conversational, but it carried to every corner of the vast space. 347 children whose names appear in no official records, whose disappearances were never investigated, whose suffering was never acknowledged by the civilization that claims to protect the innocent. They said, "Make them remember that we existed, that we mattered, that our lives had value even if your laws said otherwise." High Justice Verimark's crystalline form had grown steadily brighter throughout Maya's testimony, the harmonic resonance of his voice becoming more pronounced as his agitation increased. The legal framework of the consortium is not perfect, but it is the best system available for governing a civilization spanning thousands of worlds and dozens of species. Individual tragedies, however compelling, cannot be allowed to undermine the structures that maintain peace and order for billions of beings. Individual tragedies, Maya repeated, turning to face the Zenthari justice directly. Is that what you call genocide? Because that's what this is, Your Honor. The systematic elimination of inconvenient populations through starvation, overwork, and deliberate neglect. The only difference between your methods and those of history's most notorious mass murderers is that you've made it legal. She activated another function on her data projector, and the chamber filled with new images, dozens of similar facilities scattered across consortium space, each operating under official authorization, each filled with prisoners whose only crime was belonging to species deemed insufficiently civilized for full legal protection. 17 facilities currently in operation, Maya said, her voice taking on the clinical tone of someone reciting statistical data. Combined prisoner population of approximately 6,000 individuals, 93% of whom are classified as juvenile by their species' developmental standards. Average life expectancy in these facilities is 14 standard months. She gestured to specific images as she continued her presentation. Kepler 442b was actually one of the more benevolent operations. At least they kept their prisoners alive long enough to extract useful work from them. The facility on Tau Ceti Prime processes prisoners for organ harvesting. The one on Wolf 359 specializes in psychological experimentation. The complex orbiting Vega is devoted entirely to entertainment for consortium officials who enjoy watching sentient beings fight to the death for their amusement. Justice Melithar's translucent form was now pulsing with distress patterns that made her difficult to look at directly. These allegations are serious, but they should be addressed through proper legal channels. The destruction you caused on Kepler 442b has made any official investigation impossible. You're absolutely right, Maya agreed. My actions have made an official investigation impossible. But tell me, Justice Melithar, how many official investigations into these facilities were ongoing before I destroyed one of them? The aqueous being's silence was answer enough. How many complaints had been filed? How many requests for inspection? How many attempts to seek legal redress for the prisoner's treatment? Maya's voice grew harder with each question. The answer, in case you're wondering, is 0. Because your legal system makes it impossible for the victims to seek justice and unnecessary for the perpetrators to fear accountability. She walked closer to the justice's elevated platforms, her young face showing a determination that seemed carved from stone. You want to condemn me for taking the law into my own hands, but you refuse to acknowledge that your hands were already stained with the blood of everyone who died in those facilities before I ever arrived. Justice Thikvar's tentacles writhed in agitation. The consortium cannot be held responsible for every tragedy that occurs within its borders. Our jurisdiction spans tens of thousands of worlds, billions of different cultures and legal traditions. Perfect justice is an impossible standard. Perfect justice, Maya said, nodding slowly. You're right, of course. Perfect justice is impossible. But what about basic justice? What about the simple principle that the strong should not be allowed to prey upon the weak without consequence? What about the idea that laws should protect the innocent rather than enable their exploitation? She activated her projector again. And this time, the images showed not the mining facility's horrors, but something entirely different. Archived footage from the consortium's founding ceremonies 3 centuries earlier. The grand speeches about unity and justice and the sacred duty to protect all sentient life. We, the founding members of the Galactic Consortium, do solemnly swear to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Maya recited, her young voice carrying the weight of centuries-old promises. Those were High Justice Varimak's own words at the founding ceremony. Tell me, Your Honor, how do you reconcile those noble ideals with the reality of what your government has become? The Zenthari Justice's crystalline form flickered with patterns of light that spoke to deep emotional distress. The ideals remain valid even if their implementation has proved more challenging than originally anticipated. Progress toward true galactic justice is measured in centuries, not individual lifetimes. Centuries, Maya repeated. And how many lives are acceptable losses during those centuries of progress? How many children should die in facilities like Kepler 442b while you work toward your eventual perfect society? She was moving again, pacing the chamber's perimeter like a caged predator, her every step echoing in the vast space. You speak of the greater good as if it was some mathematical equation where individual suffering can be balanced against collective benefit. But tell me, who gets to decide what constitutes the greater good? Who determines which lives matter and which can be sacrificed for the sake of stability? The holographic display shifted again, now showing detailed schematics of the Kepler 442b facility's destruction. Maya's actions had been carefully planned and precisely executed, causing maximum damage to the mining equipment, while leaving escape routes open for anyone who chose to abandon their posts. I gave them 18 minutes, she said, her voice calm and professional as she narrated her own acts of destruction. From the moment I announced my presence to the facility's staff until the final detonation, everyone inside had 18 minutes to evacuate. The facility's emergency protocols called for complete evacuation in 12 minutes. So there was ample time for anyone who wanted to survive. The hologram showed personnel making their choices. Some rushing for the exits, others taking defensive positions, still others attempting to execute prisoners before Maya could reach them. Each decision played out in clinical detail, recorded by security systems that continued functioning even as the facility crumbled around them. Overseer Krathmak chose to barricade himself in the administration center with 17 prisoners as hostages, Maya continued, her narration accompanying the unfolding disaster. His demand was simple: guarantee his safe passage off-world or watch the hostages die. He seemed genuinely surprised when I refused to negotiate with him. The hologram showed Maya entering the administration center through a ventilation shaft, moving with the fluid grace of someone trained in combat despite her apparent youth. The confrontation with Krathmak lasted less than 30 seconds, ending when she used his own weapon against him. Guard Captain Velthar made a different choice, Maya said as the display shifted to show another section of the facility. He chose to flee, but not before setting charges throughout the prisoner quarters. His plan was to collapse the entire section, killing everyone inside, then blame their deaths on my actions. The hologram showed Maya racing through collapsing corridors, pulling survivors from debris, her own safety clearly secondary to saving as many lives as possible. Justice Karath's claws scraped against metal as he watched the display. You present these actions as if they were heroic, but they were still illegal under consortium law. The proper response to discovering criminal activity is to report it to the appropriate authorities, not to take violent action on your own initiative. Maya paused in her pacing, turning to face the massive reptilian Justice with an expression of genuine curiosity. Justice Korath, your species conquered 17 star systems before joining the consortium. How many of those conquests were accomplished through proper legal channels? The hegemony representative's silence stretched for long moments before he finally responded. Those were different circumstances. My people were defending themselves against existential threats to their survival. Existential threats. Maya nodded thoughtfully. And tell me, what constitutes an existential threat? Is it only the complete destruction of your species, Or does it include the systematic elimination of your people's freedom, dignity, and right to self-determination? She gestured to the holographic display which now showed the freed prisoners being transported to safety. These children faced an existential threat every day they remained in that facility. Their species, their cultures, their very identities were being systematically destroyed by a system that classified them as expendable resources rather than sentient beings deserving of protection. Justice Melithar's form pulsed with increasingly agitated patterns. The comparison is not valid. Justice Korath's people possessed the military capability to resist their enemies. The prisoners you claim to have been protecting had no such ability. Exactly my point, Maya said, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction. They had no ability to protect themselves, which made them dependent on others to act on their behalf. When the legal system failed them, when the authorities ignored their suffering, when the very civilization that claimed to value justice turned its back on their plight, someone had to step forward and accept responsibility for their protection. She walked to the center of the chamber, standing directly beneath the dome's focusing beam so that her slight form seemed to glow with its own inner light. You want to condemn me for taking that responsibility upon myself, but none of you were willing to take it. You want to punish me for destroying a system you knew was corrupt but were too comfortable to change. High Justice Verimac's harmonic voice filled the chamber, its resonance carrying undertones of finality. The charges against you are clear, and the evidence of your guilt is undeniable. You have admitted to the deliberate destruction of consortium property and the killing of 43 beings. Under the laws that govern this body, these crimes carry a mandatory sentence of execution. Maya nodded calmly, showing no sign of fear or distress at the pronouncement. I expected no less from this council. You cannot allow my actions to go unpunished because doing so would acknowledge the legitimacy of resistance to your authority. You cannot admit that sometimes the law itself is the enemy of justice, because that admission would undermine the entire foundation of your power. She began walking again, but this time her movement had a different quality to it, purposeful in a way that sent subtle alarms through the security systems monitoring the chamber. But tell me, Your Honors, what happens after my execution? What changes in your system to prevent future incidents like this one person? What reforms will you implement to address the conditions that led to my actions? The assembled justices exchanged glances, their silence stretching uncomfortably as Maya continued her slow circuit of the chamber. Finally, Justice Thekvar spoke, his tentacles writhing with obvious discomfort. The specifics of any administrative changes are not the concern of this judicial body. Our responsibility is to apply the law as written, not to question its wisdom or effectiveness. Administrative changes, Maya repeated, her tone suggesting she found the phrase amusing. Is that what you call genocide prevention now? Administrative changes? She stopped walking and turned to face the assembled justices directly. Let me make a prediction about your administrative changes. You'll issue new guidelines requiring better documentation of prisoner treatment. You'll mandate regular inspections by officials who can be bribed or intimidated into filing favorable reports. You'll create new oversight committees staffed by the same people who authorized the facilities in the first place. Her voice grew harder as she continued. And in 5 years, maybe 10, someone else will discover another facility just like Kepler 442b. There will be new names on the victim lists and new faces among the perpetrators, but the suffering will be identical because the system that enables it will remain unchanged. Justice Korath's massive form shifted restlessly. The alternative you seem to be advocating is chaos. If every individual is permitted to take justice into their own hands whenever they disagree with established law, civilization itself becomes impossible. Civilization, Maya said, walking closer to the hegemony representative's elevated platform. Tell me, Justice Korath, what exactly makes your current system civilized? Is it the careful legal language that transforms slavery into involuntary labor programs? Is it the bureaucratic processes that make genocide administratively convenient? Is it the judicial procedures that allow you to condemn a child to death while never questioning the system that created the conditions she was trying to address? She gestured broadly to encompass the entire chamber. This isn't civilization, Your Honors. This is barbarism dressed up in fancy rhetoric and legal precedent. True civilization would protect the weak without requiring them to prove their worth first. True civilization would seek justice for the oppressed rather than stability for the oppressors. The holographic projector activated again without any apparent signal from Maya. displaying new images that sent ripples of shock through the assembled justices. These were not scenes from the mining facility, but from the council chambers themselves. Archived footage of previous hearings where similar crimes had been quietly dismissed, complaints that had been buried, evidence that had been suppressed. "Did you think I only investigated one facility?" Maya asked, her voice carrying a note of dark amusement. "Did you assume that Kepler.442b was an isolated incident rather than part of a systematic pattern of abuse?" The holographic display showed case after case of dismissed complaints, ignored evidence, and buried investigations. "I have documentation of 17 similar facilities, 43 cover-up operations, and over 200 instances where evidence of systematic abuse was deliberately suppressed by consortium officials." Justice Melathar's translucent form was now pulsing so rapidly with distress patterns that she was barely visible. "How did you obtain classified judicial records?" "The same way I obtained everything else," Maya replied. "By being patient, thorough, and completely committed to uncovering the truth regardless of the personal cost." She gestured to the continuing display of evidence. "Your security systems are impressive, but they were designed to keep out conventional threats. They weren't prepared for someone willing to spend months learning their weaknesses, someone with nothing to lose and everything to gain by exposing the truth." The chamber fell silent except for the harmonic resonance of the dome's focusing system and the subtle electronic hum of the holographic projector. The assembled justices found themselves confronted not just with evidence of their own complicity in systematic atrocities, but with the uncomfortable realization that their entire legal framework had been compromised by someone they had dismissed as a mere child. High Justice Varimak's crystalline form flickered with increasingly rapid patterns as he struggled to process the implications of Maya's revelations. "Even if these allegations are true, they do not alter the legal reality of your situation. You have confessed to terrorism and murder. The law requires your execution regardless of any mitigating circumstances." "The law," Maya said, nodding slowly. "Yes, let's discuss the law, Your Honor." She walked to the chamber's center, positioning herself directly beneath the dome's focusing beam, under Consortium Statute 4.7. 2. Subsection 15. Any being accused of capital crimes has the right to challenge the jurisdiction of the court hearing their case. Do you remember that particular law, Justice Varimak? The Zenthari justice's harmonic voice carried undertones of uncertainty for the first time in the proceedings. "That statute has not been invoked in over 2 centuries. It requires specific circumstances that do not apply to your case." "Specific circumstances," Maya agreed. "Such as evidence that the court itself has been compromised by criminal activity, or proof that the legal system has been systematically corrupted to the point where fair judgment is impossible." She gestured to the holographic display, which continued cycling through evidence of judicial corruption and administrative cover-ups. "I believe I've met those requirements." Justice Thekvar's tentacles writhed in agitation. "The jurisdiction of this council derives from the consortium charter and cannot be challenged by individual defendants. The statute you cite was intended for use in disputes between member governments, not criminal proceedings." "Actually," Maya said, her voice taking on the precise tone of someone quoting legal text, "the statute makes no such distinction. It states, and I quote, 'Any proceedings before the Great Council may be challenged on jurisdictional grounds by any party able to demonstrate systematic corruption or compromise of the judicial process.'" She paused, letting the words sink in. "I am a party to these proceedings, and I have demonstrated systematic corruption. The challenge is valid under your own laws." The chamber erupted in confused murmurs as the assembled justices realized the implications of Maya's legal maneuver. If her challenge were accepted, it would require a complete review of every case heard by the council over the past several centuries, potentially invalidating thousands of decisions and undermining the entire foundation of consortium law. Justice Korath's claws scraped loudly against his seat's armrest. "This is a transparent attempt to delay justice through legal technicalities. The council will not be manipulated by desperate appeals to obscure precedents." "Desperate appeals," Maya repeated, her expression showing genuine amusement for the first time since entering the chamber. "Your Honor, there is nothing desperate about this appeal. I have no intention of delaying anything." She reached into her sleeve and withdrew another device, this one significantly larger than the data projector she had used earlier. The security systems immediately went active, energy fields crackling to life around the chamber as automated defenses prepared to neutralize what appeared to be a weapon. But Maya made no aggressive moves, simply holding the device where everyone could see it clearly. "This is a quantum resonance transmitter," she explained calmly, ignoring the weapon systems trained on her. "Right now, every piece of evidence I've shown you, along with complete documentation of this trial, is being broadcast to news networks, government offices, and civilian populations on over 3,000 worlds throughout Consortium space." The chamber fell silent, except for the humming of active weapon systems and the increasingly agitated harmonic resonance from High Justice Varimak's crystalline form. Maya continued speaking, as if addressing a casual conversation, rather than a room full of individuals preparing to kill her. "The citizens of those 3,000 worlds are currently learning about the systematic atrocities committed in their name by a government they trusted to protect them. They're seeing evidence of judicial corruption that spans centuries. They're watching their leaders struggle to justify the unjustifiable." She smiled then, the expression somehow both childlike and predatory. "Tell me, Your Honors, how do you think they're going to react?" Justice Melitha's form pulsed with rapid distress patterns. "You cannot broadcast classified judicial proceedings without authorization. Such actions constitute a violation of galactic security protocols." "Galactic security protocols," Maya nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, I suppose exposing the truth does represent a significant security threat to your current system of government. But tell me, Justice Melitha, whose security are those protocols actually designed to protect? The citizens who are being oppressed or the officials who are oppressing them?" She activated another function on the transmitter, and suddenly the chamber filled with new voices. Audio feeds from news broadcasts, emergency government sessions, and civilian protests that were already beginning to erupt across Consortium space. The reaction to Maya's revelations was immediate and overwhelming, with populations that had remained passive for centuries suddenly demanding answers and accountability from their leaders. "The people of Centauri Prime are demanding the immediate resignation of their Consortium representatives," Maya narrated as audio clips played through the chamber's speakers. "The government of New Tokyo has announced an independent investigation into Consortium activities within their system. The Martian colonies are threatening to secede from the Consortium entirely unless major reforms are implemented within the next standard month." She gestured to encompass the entire chamber. "This is what real justice looks like, Your Honors. Not the sterile legal proceedings that protect the guilty while silencing the innocent, but the raw, messy, dangerous process of holding power accountable to the people it claims to serve." Justice Varimak's harmonic voice cracked as he attempted to maintain control over proceedings that had spiraled far beyond his authority. "These broadcasts constitute an act of sedition against lawfully constituted authority. The Council orders their immediate cessation." Maya's laughter filled the vast chamber, echoing off the crystalline dome and marble walls with a sound that seemed to mock centuries of accumulated judicial dignity. "You order their cessation? Your Honor, you seem to be operating under the delusion that you still possess the authority to give orders that anyone feels obligated to obey." The holographic projector activated again, displaying real-time footage from across Consortium space. Government buildings surrounded by protesters, military units refusing orders to suppress civilian demonstrations, entire star systems declaring independence from Consortium authority. The carefully maintained order that had governed the galaxy for 3 centuries was crumbling in real time as billions of beings discovered the truth about their government's actions. "This is chaos," Justice Korath snarled, his massive form rising from its seat as his species' predatory instincts overwhelmed his judicial training. "You have destroyed the stability that has kept this galaxy at peace for 300 years. Billions will die in the wars that follow this madness. Billions have already died under your stability," Maya replied, her voice cold and implacable. "They died in mining facilities and experimental laboratories and gladiatorial arenas, but they died quietly, so their deaths didn't threaten your precious order." She walked closer to the hegemony representative's platform, her small form somehow radiating a menace that made the massive reptilian being step backward. "You want to blame me for the chaos that's coming, but I didn't create the conditions that made it inevitable. I simply exposed them to the light of day." Her voice rose to carry throughout the chamber. "Every act of rebellion happening right now, every demand for justice, every call for accountability, these are the natural consequences of your own actions coming back to haunt you." Justice Thekvar's tentacles writhed frantically as he attempted to process the implications of what was happening. Even if reforms are necessary, this approach will lead to the complete collapse of galactic civilization. The Consortium may be flawed, but it is better than the anarchy that will replace it. Maya turned to face the molluscan representative, her expression thoughtful. Better for whom, Justice Thekvar? Better for the billions of beings who have lived their entire lives under systematic oppression? Better for the countless children who have died in facilities like Kepler 442b? Better for the species that have been classified as subservient because they lack the military power to demand equality? She gestured to the continuing audio feeds from across consortium space. The people speaking out right now don't seem to think your system is better than the alternatives. They seem to believe that even chaos is preferable to living under a government that treats them as expendable resources rather than sentient beings deserving of respect. The chamber's security systems had reached maximum alert status, with energy weapons trained on Maya from multiple angles and containment fields ready to activate at the first sign of aggressive action. But Maya seemed completely unconcerned by the lethal arsenal arrayed against her, moving with the casual confidence of someone who had already accepted whatever fate awaited her. "The question now," she continued, walking to the chamber's center where she could address all the justices simultaneously, "is what you intend to do about the situation I've created. You could execute me as your laws require, but that won't stop the broadcasts or undo the damage to your authority. You could attempt to suppress the uprising through military force, but that would only prove that everything I've said about your government is true." She paused, letting her words settle in the vast space. "Or you could do something unprecedented in the history of this council. You could admit that your system has failed, accept responsibility for the atrocities committed in your name, and begin the difficult process of creating a truly just form of galactic governance. High Justice Varimax's crystalline form flickered with patterns that spoke to deep internal conflict. What you are proposing is the complete dissolution of the legal framework that has maintained galactic peace for 3 centuries. The consequences of such an action would be catastrophic. The consequences of maintaining the current system have already been catastrophic, Maya replied. The only difference is that those consequences have been carefully hidden from public view until now. She activated her transmitter again, and new images filled the chamber. Mass graves discovered at abandoned facilities, medical experiments conducted on unwilling subjects, entire populations systematically eliminated because they were deemed inconvenient to consortium interests. This is your legacy, Your Honors. This is what 3 centuries of consortium justice has actually accomplished. Her voice carried a weight of sorrow that seemed impossible for someone so young. The only question is whether you want to be remembered as the leaders who perpetuated these atrocities or the ones who finally found the courage to stop them. Justice Melithar's translucent form had stabilized somewhat, her distress patterns settling into something resembling resolve. Even assuming your allegations are true, the legal reality remains unchanged. You have confessed to capital crimes under consortium law. This council is bound by oath and duty to impose the prescribed sentence. Maya nodded slowly, her expression showing something that might have been respect for the aqueous Republic representative's honesty. You're absolutely right, Justice Melithar. Under the current system, my execution is not only legal, but mandatory. But tell me, what happens to a legal system when the people it governs no longer recognize its legitimacy? The audio feeds from across consortium space provided the answer in real time. Governments declaring independence, military units defecting to join civilian protesters, entire star systems severing communication with the central authority on Nexus Prime. The consortium was fragmenting before their eyes, its carefully maintained unity dissolving under the weight of revealed truth. You see the situation clearly, Maya continued, her voice taking on an almost conversational tone despite the chaos surrounding them. You can execute me, but doing so will only make me a martyr for the cause of galactic justice. You can attempt to restore order through force, but that will only prove that your authority rests on violence rather than consent. You can try to negotiate with the rebel systems, but they will never trust a government that has systematically lied to them for 3 centuries. She walked to the edge of the chamber's central platform, positioning herself at the boundary between the accused's designated area and the justices' elevated seats. The old system is dead, Your Honors. I didn't kill it. It died the moment the truth about its operations became public. The only question now is what will replace it. Justice Korath's claws scraped against metal as he struggled to control his species' aggressive instincts. And I suppose you have a solution to offer? Some grand plan for restructuring galactic civilization according to your adolescent idealism? Maya's smile was sharp and predatory. Actually, Justice Korath, I do have a solution, but it's not my plan, it's yours. She activated her transmitter again, and the chamber filled with audio from the consortium's founding ceremonies 3 centuries earlier. Speeches about unity and justice, solemn oaths to protect all sentient life, promises of equality and representation for all member species. The framework for a just galactic government already exists, she explained as the historical audio continued playing. It's contained in the original charter that established this consortium. The problem isn't with the ideals your predecessors established. It's with the way those ideals have been systematically ignored and corrupted over time. The holographic projector activated alongside the audio feeds, displaying the original text of the consortium charter with all its noble principles and carefully crafted safeguards. Equal representation for all species, protection of individual rights regardless of species, age, or economic status, transparent governance with accountability to the governed. These aren't radical concepts, they're the founding principles of your own government. Justice Thakvar's tentacles writhed with what might have been hope or despair. The charter you cite is a historical document. The practical realities of governing thousands of worlds and dozens of species required adaptations to those original principles. Adaptations, Maya repeated, her tone suggesting she found the euphemism distasteful. Is that what you call the systematic exclusion of inconvenient species from governmental representation? Is that how you justify the creation of a legal framework that protects the oppressors while silencing the oppressed? She gestured to the continuing holographic display, which now showed side-by-side comparisons of charter principles and current consortium practices. Every adaptation you've made has moved your government further away from justice and closer to tyranny. Every compromise with expediency has weakened the protections your founders tried to establish. The audio feeds from across consortium space continued providing real-time updates on the growing rebellion. More systems declaring independence, civilian populations demanding new forms of government, military commanders announcing their refusal to suppress legitimate protests. The galaxy was reshaping itself in real time, and the assembled justices found themselves witnesses to the collapse of everything they had spent their lives defending. High Justice Varimak's harmonic voice carried undertones of desperate authority as he attempted to restore order to proceedings that had moved far beyond his control. This council will not be lectured by a terrorist on matters of law and governance. You will submit to the lawful sentence of this court, or face immediate enforcement action. Maya turned to face the Xanthari justice directly, her young face showing an expression of profound sadness. Immediate enforcement action. You mean you'll kill me right here in this chamber rather than follow your own legal procedures? She nodded slowly, as if confirming something she had already suspected. Thank you for proving my point about the true nature of your justice system, Your Honor. She walked closer to Varinak's elevated platform, moving with the fluid confidence of someone who had already accepted their fate. But before you execute me, let me offer you one final piece of evidence. She reached into her other sleeve and withdrew a small device that looked identical to a standard medical scanner. The chamber's security systems immediately went active, but Maya made no threatening moves with the device. Instead, she held it up where everyone could see it clearly. This is a genetic analysis scanner, modified to interface with your chamber's holographic systems. Would you like to see what it reveals about my identity? Without waiting for permission, she activated the device, and the chamber, filled with scrolling displays of genetic code, biological markers, and genealogical data. The assembled justices found themselves looking at a complete genetic profile of the young human standing before them. My name is Maya Chen, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. Daughter of Dr. Sarah Chen and Commander Michael Chen of the Human Colonial Defense Force. Born on New Shanghai Colony in the year 2373. Orphaned when raiders destroyed my settlement in 2380. She paused, letting the biographical information register with her audience. But those are just the basic facts, she continued. The interesting part is what the genetic scan reveals about my family history. The holographic display shifted to show expanded genealogical data, tracing Maya's ancestry back through multiple generations. Justice Melithar's translucent form pulsed with confusion patterns. What relevance does your ancestry have to the charges against you? Maya's smile was sharp and predatory. My great-great-grandmother was Commander Elena Vasquez of the Terran Defense Fleet. She died defending Earth during the Consortium's conquest of the Sol system. My great-great-grandfather was Dr. James Chen, who led the resistance movement on Mars before being executed for terrorist activities against Consortium forces. The genetic display continued scrolling through ancestral records, each entry accompanied by historical data that painted a picture of systematic oppression spanning generations. My great-grandmother was Maria Santos, who spent 15 years in consortium labor camps before dying of malnutrition and overwork. My great-grandfather was Lieutenant Colonel David Kim, who was court-martialed and executed for refusing to participate in the massacre of civilian populations on Europa. She walked closer to the justices' platforms, her small form somehow radiating a presence that filled the vast chamber. Do you see the pattern, Your Honors? Every generation of my family has been touched by your justice. Every relative I can trace has been killed, imprisoned, or brutalized by the system you represent. Justice Korath's massive form shifted restlessly. The actions of previous generations do not justify criminal behavior by their descendants. You cannot claim hereditary grievances as justification for terrorism. Hereditary grievances, Maya repeated thoughtfully. An interesting phrase, Justice Korath. But tell me, what do you call it when a government systematically oppresses the same families across multiple generations? What do you call it when children are condemned to suffer for the crimes of resisting tyranny? The holographic display shifted again, now showing not just Maya's family history, but similar patterns affecting millions of other families across human space. This isn't about hereditary grievances, Your Honor. This is about recognizing that systematic oppression creates systematic resistance. When you build a society that treats certain populations as expendable, you shouldn't be surprised when members of those populations fight back. She gestured broadly to encompass the entire chamber. Every person in my family who resisted your authority was branded a terrorist and executed. Every attempt to seek justice through legal channels was dismissed or suppressed. Every peaceful protest was met with violence and imprisonment. Tell me, Your Honors, what options does that leave for people who refuse to accept injustice? High Justice Verimark's crystalline form flickered with increasingly rapid patterns as he struggled to process the implications of Maya's revelations. The historical grievances of your species do not grant you license to commit atrocities in the present. The law exists to prevent cycles of vengeance that would otherwise consume entire civilizations. Cycles of vengeance, Maya said, nodding slowly. Yes, that's exactly what this is. But tell me, Justice Verimark, who started this particular cycle? Was it my great-great-grandmother who fired the first shots in defense of her home world? Or was it the consortium fleet that came to conquer it? Was it my great-grandfather who began the violence by refusing to participate in genocide? Or was it the officials who ordered that genocide in the first place? The audio feeds from across consortium space continued providing updates on the growing rebellion, but now they carried a different tone. The initial chaos was beginning to organize itself into something more structured and purposeful, as populations that had been oppressed for centuries finally found their voice. The cycle of vengeance you're worried about has already been running for 300 years, Maya continued, her voice taking on a harder edge. The difference is that, until now, only one side has been participating in it. Your government has systematically eliminated anyone who opposed its policies, then branded their resistance as terrorism and their deaths as justice. She walked to the chamber's center, positioning herself beneath the focusing beam so that her slight form seemed to glow with its own inner light. I'm not here to continue that cycle, Your Honors. I'm here to end it. The question is whether you're wise enough to help me do that, or whether you're so committed to preserving your failing system that you'll choose mutual destruction instead. The chamber fell silent, except for the continuing audio feeds and the harmonic resonance of the dome's focusing system. The assembled justices found themselves confronted with a choice that would determine not just Maya's fate, but the future of galactic civilization itself. Justice Thekvar's tentacles writhed as he struggled with the implications of everything he had heard. What exactly are you proposing? Complete governmental collapse followed by, what? Anarchy? Civil war? The dissolution of 3 centuries of accumulated law and precedent? Maya's expression softened slightly, showing something that might have been understanding or even sympathy. I'm proposing what your own founders originally envisioned, Justice Thekvar, a government that derives its authority from the consent of the governed, a legal system that protects the weak rather than enabling their exploitation, a civilization that lives up to the noble ideals expressed in its founding documents. She gestured to the holographic display, which now showed the original consortium charter, alongside detailed proposals for governmental reform. The framework already exists. The principles are already established. All that's required is the political will to implement them honestly rather than subverting them for the convenience of those in power. Justice Melathar's form pulsed with what might have been hope. These reforms you propose, they would require the complete restructuring of galactic governance, The political and economic disruptions would be enormous. The political and economic disruptions are already enormous, Maya replied, gesturing to the continuing audio feeds of rebellion and protest. The only difference is whether those disruptions lead to constructive change or destructive collapse. The choice is still yours to make, but not for much longer. She activated her transmitter again, and new information flooded the chamber. Detailed analyses of governmental collapse scenarios, economic projections for different reform approaches, even preliminary constitutional frameworks that rebel systems were already beginning to implement. The galaxy is going to change, Your Honors, with or without your cooperation. The only question is whether you want to be part of the solution or casualties of the problem. High Justice Varimak's harmonic voice carried undertones of defeat as he finally acknowledged the reality of their situation. You have engineered the complete destruction of the governmental system that has maintained galactic peace for 3 centuries. Even if your proposed reforms are implemented, the transition period will be chaotic and destructive. Maya nodded calmly, showing no satisfaction at the admission of her success. Transitions are always chaotic, Your Honor. But tell me, is the chaos of positive change worse than the stability of systematic oppression? Is temporary disruption more destructive than permanent injustice? She walked closer to the Zenthari Justice's platform, her voice taking on a tone that was almost conversational. You've presided over this council for 4 centuries. In all that time, have you ever seen genuine progress toward the ideals expressed in your founding charter? Have you witnessed any meaningful reduction in the suffering of those your government claims to protect? The silence that followed was answer enough. For 4 centuries, High Justice Varimak had watched the consortium drift steadily away from its founding principles, compromising with expedience until those noble ideals became nothing more than empty rhetoric used to justify increasingly authoritarian policies. The system you've devoted your life to defending is already dead, Maya continued, her voice gentle but implacable. It died the moment it became more concerned with preserving its own power than serving its intended purpose. I didn't kill it. I simply performed an autopsy and published the results. The holographic display shifted again, now showing real-time footage from across the galaxy. New governments forming based on principles of equality and representation. Former consortium colonies establishing constitutional conventions. Military units swearing allegiance to civilian populations rather than distant authorities. The galaxy was reshaping itself in real time, and the process was far more organized and purposeful than anyone in the chamber had anticipated. The people you've governed for 3 centuries aren't calling for anarchy, Maya observed, narrating the unfolding transformation. They're demanding the democracy and justice that were promised to them when the consortium was founded. They're creating the civilization that your founders envisioned, but that your successors abandoned. Justice Korath's claws scraped against metal as he watched his carefully ordered universe dissolving into something he couldn't control or understand. Even if these new governments succeed in establishing stable rule, they will lack the experience and institutional knowledge necessary for effective governance. Chaos and conflict are inevitable. Maya turned to face the massive reptilian being, her expression showing genuine understanding of his concerns. You're absolutely right, Justice Korath. The new governments will make mistakes. There will be conflicts and inefficiencies and probably some degree of chaos as different systems experiment with different approaches to governance. She paused, letting his fears settle in the vast chamber before continuing. But tell me, are inexperienced governments trying to do the right thing more dangerous than experienced governments that have perfected the art of systematic oppression? Are the mistakes of democracy worse than the deliberate cruelties of authoritarianism? The audio feeds provided a continuous stream of updates on the galactic transformation. Peaceful transitions of power in some systems, tense negotiations in others, but remarkably little of the violence and chaos that the justices had predicted. The populations rising up against consortium authorities seemed more interested in building something better than in destroying everything that already existed. The galaxy is changing, Maya continued, walking back to the chamber's center. The only question now is what role this council wants to play in that change. You can cling to your failing authority until it's torn from your grasp, or you can help guide the transition towards something better. She gestured to encompass the entire chamber. This building, these institutions, the accumulated legal knowledge represented in this room, none of it has to be destroyed. It can all be transformed and repurposed to serve the cause of genuine justice instead of perpetuating systematic oppression. Justice Melathar's translucent form pulsed with patterns that suggested deep internal conflict. What you're proposing is essentially asking us to preside over our own dissolution, to voluntarily surrender the authority we've spent our lives defending. I'm asking you to transform that authority into something worthy of defense, Maya replied, to become the leaders your founders intended you to be, instead of the tyrants you've allowed yourselves to become. Her voice carried no accusation or condemnation, only a simple statement of observed fact. She activated her transmitter again, and the chamber filled with new images. Constitutional conventions already underway on dozens of worlds, legal scholars from multiple species working together to draft new frameworks for governance, former consortium officials joining the reform movement rather than fighting against it. The transformation is already happening, with or without your participation, but it could happen more smoothly and more successfully with your help. High Justice Varimak's crystalline form had stabilized somewhat, its flickering pattern settling into something resembling resignation. You speak of transformation and reform as if they were simple matters of political will, but the practical challenges of governing a galactic civilization are enormous. The compromises we made were not born of malice, but of necessity. Maya nodded thoughtfully, her expression showing genuine respect for the complexity of the challenges Varimak had faced. You're absolutely right, Your Honor. Governing a galactic civilization is incredibly difficult, and many of the compromises you made were probably inevitable, given the constraints you were operating under. She walked closer to his platform, her voice taking on a tone of gentle but firm correction. But somewhere along the way, those practical compromises became moral compromises. The expedient solutions became permanent policies. The temporary sacrifices of principle became systematic betrayals of everything your government was supposed to represent. The holographic display shifted to show detailed analyses of decision points throughout consortium history. Moments where leaders had chosen expediency over principle, efficiency over justice, stability over freedom. Each individual decision seemed reasonable at the time. Each compromise appeared necessary for the greater good. But the cumulative effect was the transformation of a democratic federation into an authoritarian empire. Justice Thekvar's tentacles writhed with what might have been understanding or despair. Even accepting your analysis of how we arrived at this point, the path forward remains unclear. How do you propose to avoid the same gradual corruption in whatever system replaces the current one? Maya's smile showed genuine appreciation for the question. By learning from your mistakes, Justice Thekvar, by building safeguards against the accumulation of unaccountable power, by creating systems that automatically course-correct when they begin drifting away from their founding principles. The holographic display now showed detailed constitutional frameworks being developed across the galaxy, each incorporating lessons learned from the consortium's gradual descent into authoritarianism. Term limits for officials, mandatory transparency in governmental operations, constitutional protections that couldn't be overridden by administrative convenience, regular referendums on fundamental governmental policies. The new governments being established aren't trying to recreate the consortium with different people in charge, Maya explained as the display continued cycling through reform proposals. They're trying to create something fundamentally different, systems of governance that are structurally resistant to the kind of corruption that destroyed your civilization. Justice Korath's massive form had grown still as he absorbed the implications of what Maya was describing. You're proposing to limit governmental power in ways that could make effective governance impossible. Some decisions require speed and secrecy that democratic processes cannot provide. But those decisions should be rare exceptions, not standard operating procedures. And even emergency powers need sunset clauses and oversight mechanisms to prevent their... Her voice carried a note of steel that suggested this was a point she would not compromise on. The consortium's problems didn't begin with the establishment of emergency powers, she continued. They began when those emergency powers became permanent features of your governmental structure, when the exceptions became the rules and the oversight mechanisms were quietly dismantled in the name of efficiency. The audio feeds from across consortium space continued providing updates on the ongoing transformation, but now they carried a different tone. The initial chaos was giving way to organized reconstruction, as newly liberated populations began implementing the governmental reforms they had been dreaming of for centuries. The galaxy is proving that democratic governance is possible even on an interstellar scale, Maya observed, gesturing to the continuing stream of positive developments. The populations you've governed for 3 centuries aren't descending into chaos and violence. They're creating constitutional conventions and establishing Bill of Rights and implementing the kinds of governmental structures your founders originally envisioned. She walked back to the chamber's center, her slight form somehow commanding the attention of beings who had wielded power over trillions of lives. The question that remains is what happens to the people who presided over the system that those populations are now rejecting? Do you become obstacles to be overcome or partners in building something better? High Justice Varimax's harmonic voice carried undertones of curiosity alongside the resignation. What exactly are you proposing? That we simply abdicate our positions and hope the new governments will have mercy on us? Maya's expression grew thoughtful as she considered the question. I'm proposing that you do something unprecedented in the history of this council. That you acknowledge your mistakes, accept responsibility for the consequences of your policies, and dedicate yourselves to helping repair the damage you've caused. The holographic display shifted to show examples from across the galaxy, former consortium officials joining reform movements, retired military officers training civilian populations in self-governance, bureaucrats helping new governments establish administrative systems that prioritize transparency and accountability over efficiency and control. Redemption is possible, Maya said, her voice carrying a note of hope that seemed somehow incongruous given the circumstances. But it requires genuine repentance, not just political calculation. It requires admitting that your system failed not because of external enemies or impossible circumstances, but because you allowed it to drift away from the principles it was supposed to serve. Justice Melathar's translucent form pulsed with patterns of deep contemplation. Even assuming we were willing to take such a step, the practical mechanics remain unclear. How does one dismantle a governmental system that spans thousands of worlds without creating chaos and suffering on an unimaginable scale? Very carefully, Maya replied, her tone suggesting she had given this question considerable thought. The transition has to be gradual and managed, with existing institutions continuing to function even as they're transformed into something more democratic and accountable. The holographic display now showed detailed transition plans that rebel systems were already implementing. Temporary fusion governments that included reformed consortium officials alongside newly elected representatives, gradual transfer of authority from central command to local governance, careful preservation of essential services while eliminating oppressive policies. The goal isn't to destroy everything the consortium has built, Maya explained, as the display continued cycling through transition scenarios. It's to preserve what works while eliminating what doesn't. To maintain stability and continuity while implementing fundamental reforms that address the systemic problems that led to this crisis. Justice Thekvar's tentacles writhed with what might have been hope or despair. What you're describing would require unprecedented cooperation between former enemies. The level of trust and goodwill necessary for such a transition seems unlikely. Maya nodded, acknowledging the validity of his concerns. Trust has to be earned through actions, not words. The first step is for the current leadership to demonstrate their commitment to genuine reform by voluntarily surrendering the powers they've abused. She gestured to encompass the entire chamber. This council could begin that process right now by dissolving itself and calling for new elections based on truly democratic principles. By opening all classified files to public scrutiny. By cooperating fully with independent investigations into consortium policies and practices. The assembled justices exchanged glances, each contemplating the personal and political implications of what Maya was proposing. To voluntarily surrender their positions would be to admit that everything they had devoted their lives to defending had been fundamentally corrupted. But to continue fighting for a system that was already collapsing would only make the eventual reckoning more destructive. Justice Korath's claws scraped loudly against his seat's armrest as he struggled with the implications of Maya's proposal. You ask us to commit political suicide based on the accusations of a confessed terrorist. Why should we trust that the new governments will treat us fairly if we cooperate with their demands? Maya's expression grew serious as she considered the question. You shouldn't trust them, Justice Korath. You should earn their trust by demonstrating through your actions that you've genuinely learned from your mistakes and are committed to preventing their repetition. She walked closer to his platform, her voice taking on a tone of gentle but firm honesty. The populations rising up against consortium authority aren't looking for vengeance. Despite having every right to demand it, they're looking for justice and assurance that the atrocities committed against them will never happen again. If you can help provide those things, you'll find them surprisingly willing to forgive past wrongs. The audio feeds provided supporting evidence. Interviews with rebel leaders emphasizing their commitment to peaceful transition and restorative justice rather than retribution and punishment. The galaxy was not calling for the blood of its former oppressors, but for their genuine cooperation in building something better. The choice is still yours, Maya continued, addressing all the assembled justices. You can fight for a system that's already dead and go down with it, or you can help birth the system that's being born to replace it. But the window for making that choice is closing rapidly. High Justice Varimax's crystalline form flickered with patterns of deep internal conflict as he contemplated the destruction of everything he had spent 4 centuries building and defending. Even if we were to accept your analysis and recommendations, the legal framework governing this council makes such actions impossible. We are bound by oaths and procedures that cannot simply be set aside for political convenience. Maya's smile showed genuine appreciation for the complexity of the legal challenges Varimax had identified. Actually, Your Honor, the legal framework provides exactly the mechanisms necessary for the kind of transformation I'm proposing. You simply have to be willing to use them. The holographic display shifted to show specific sections of the Consortium Charter, highlighting provisions that had been forgotten or ignored for centuries. Emergency procedures for governmental reorganization, constitutional conventions, referendums on fundamental policy changes, all the tools necessary for peaceful transformation were already embedded in the legal code. The founders of the consortium were wiser than their successors, Maya observed as the display continued highlighting relevant legal provisions. They understood that any governmental system might eventually become corrupted, so they built in mechanisms for peaceful revolution. Those mechanisms have never been used because the people who would need to invoke them were the same ones who benefited from the system's corruption. Justice Melitha's form pulsed with patterns of growing understanding. You're suggesting that we use the consortium's own legal framework to dissolve the consortium and establish something new in its place. I'm suggesting that you honor your oaths to the original charter by implementing the reforms it calls for but that have been systematically ignored, Maya corrected gently. The consortium your founders envisioned and the one you've been governing are two very different things. It's time to bring reality in line with ideals. She activated her transmitter again, and the chamber filled with audio from the original This response paused because Claude reached its max length for a message. It continued to nudge Claude along. Continue.